right, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Salam, hello everybody. Thank you all very much for joining us today, or those who will be listening to us later. Thank you very much for taking the time. My name is Helia Dotaqi, and it is my pleasure to welcome all of you to this virtual panel discussion entitled The U.S.-Israel Aggression Against Iran. And we will be discussing and having a conversation about the legal aspects of this act of aggression. And I would like to thank the organizers at the TDF, as well as the Institute for Political and International Studies of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Islamic Republic of Iran, for convening this important and timely gathering. We come together at a moment of profound regional and international transformation. The 80 days plus 2 years before it has raised urgent questions about the future of international law, the prohibition on the use of force as one of the most fundamental principles of international law, and the stability of the post-1945 legal order. These developments must also be situated within a wider historical trajectory that has accelerated since October 7th, which was followed by the genocide in Gaza by Zionist forces backed by the US, which many scholars and analysts and legal experts identify as a critical inflection point, reshaping political, legal, and security dynamics across West Asia and beyond. So it is in this spirit that we have gathered here today, bringing together prominent Iranian legal scholars and distinguished diplomats to unpack the legal implications of these developments and reflect on the possible trajectories going forward. Our discussion will focus not only on the doctrinal question of international law, but also on the broader structures and tensions between power, legality, and evolving international order. It is my profound honor to introduce some of the most distinguished guests that we have the pleasure of having today. We have Dr. Purya Askari, who is an associate professor at Allama Tabatabai University. We have Dr. Sayyid Hossein Sadat Meidani, who is a former Iranian ambassador and assistant professor of the School of International Relations. We have Dr. Dupont joining us from Paris today online, who is a senior researcher of international law. Thank you very much for being with us, Dr. Dupont. We have Dr. Alireza Kazemi, who is a former Iranian ambassador to Netherlands and a senior affiliate at IPIS. We also have Professor Mohsen Baharvand, who is a former Iranian ambassador in the United Kingdom and a senior expert in international law. We also have, last but not least, Dr. Abbas Baqir Pur Ardakani, who is the Director General of International Legal Affairs of Ministry of Foreign Affairs, who we have the pleasure of having him join us online. And he's also a former ambassador of Islamic Republic of Iran in Australia. Thank you all very much for being with us and for being here today. I would like to start with, I guess it would be helpful to do to go back to February 28th and when it started, although I think we all agree that it didn't start on February 28th. But I would like to start there. We know that the US and the Zionist entity struck Iran following weeks of threats and military buildup in the Persian Gulf, and initiated a new significant phase of escalation against the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the Islamic Republic of Iran. We know, the initial act was the assassination of the supreme leader of Iran, Sayyid Ayatollah Khamenei, and which launched the beginning of the aggression, and the escalation carried forward for the next 70 days. For decades, we've had discussions about the legality of a lot of violations and acts of aggressions, but more recently we're witnessing that it's less so about the legality and more so about the lack of legality and how we need to be working through these conceptions when we talk about international legal order. Let's just start there. Let's just start with the very foundations of the post-1945 order, the principle of non-intervention, the 2-4 article. We would love to hear your thoughts, Dr. Askari.
Yes, sure. Thank you very much, Dr. Dotaghi, for your very nice and kind introduction. And hello, everyone, wherever you are in the world, and hope you are in peace and safety. Well, I think the question is really important, and I just want to remind everyone that in the Article 2.4 of the United Nations Charter, actually we have two obligations. One obligation is the prohibition of use of force, and the other one is the prohibition on threat of use of force. We can discuss, maybe there are some exceptions when it comes to the prohibition on use of force. For example, we have self-defense, or when the Security Council has a kind of decision that there is a need for using force in international relations. But when it comes to threat of use of force, of course, here we have a kind of jus cogens norm of international law, which is nowadays we can see is repeatedly on a daily basis is violated by mainly the United States. I mean, recently we can see that, okay, we are in the midst of the negotiations, and each time you have the threat that, okay, you do negotiate or otherwise we will bomb. So this is a kind of threat of use of force. And of course it is a kind of repetition of violation of what is mentioned in the Article 2.4 when it comes to threat of use of force. But of course, we know that since 1945, we had many occasions that especially the superpowers, they use their military army to force those who are not exactly in line with their politics. And of course, when it comes to the Islamic Revolution in 1979, we can see that the Islamic Republic of Iran is unfortunately a target for these kind of violations of the UN Charter, especially we are talking about Article 2.4. But what is interesting is usually when the superpowers, they resort to force to, in a way, try to convince the victim state. At the end of the day, they immediately publish a kind of, let's say, legal argument or a legal statement to convince the international community that we did that, and these are the reasons that justify our operation or our military attack under international law. This time, 28 February 2026, the aggression took place against Iran, and we could see that after 10 days, there was a very brief letter to the Security Council by the Americans, and after more than 6-7 weeks, I mean, after the ceasefire was actually implemented, we could see that there was a kind of statement by one of the legal advisors of the State Department of the United States, appeared on the website of the ministry. There, what was very interesting was, well, the objectives, which for me, as a lawyer, is a bit difficult to understand how these kind of justifications are legally correct when it comes to use of force. I mean, the first objective, which is announced, is, okay, the operation took place to make sure Iran never have nuclear weapons. The second objective, which is mentioned, is to destroy the Iranian Navy and all the security infrastructure. And the third one is to destroy the missiles program of Iran. I would say, I mean, these objectives are not in any way a kind of argument or justification to use force in international law, generally speaking. But apart from that, there are also some arguments which are mentioned that I want just very briefly to touch them. There are two main arguments. The first one is actually the armed conflict between Iran and the United States was continuing since June 2025. So they are saying there is no new attack, there is no new aggression, there is no new armed conflict. What is happening now is a kind of continuation of an ongoing armed conflict, which is very interesting because we know that there were some discussions between Iranians and the Americans just before 28 February, and There were many items on the table for discussion, but there was no discussion about a kind of ceasefire. At the moment, we know that we are talking also about the ceasefire, how we have to continue the ceasefire, how we have to reach a deal to just finish the armed conflict. But at that time, that was not even the case for the Americans. So all of a sudden, they just changed their mind and they said, well, we are in the situation of armed conflict since June 2025, which is very interesting. And it is very interesting that from legal point of view, it's not easy to just argue these kind of justifications from the point of use ad bellum or use of force. Of course, this is the link between the use of force and the international humanitarian law or the law of armed conflict, which is very basic, and it is saying that when there is no clashes between the two parties, we can say that this is the end of armed conflict, or when there is the end of active hostilities, actually the armed conflict is finished. So the first argument, I would say, is not acceptable, legally speaking. The second argument is a bit different, talking about a new self-defense. This time, because in 1979, the threat against us started by what happened about the US Embassy in Tehran, and it was continued by the Iranians threatening the Americans. I mean, okay, Article 51 of the United Nations Charter is crystal clear. You need a kind of armed attack. I mean, if it is a kind of a slogan going on, and based on that you want to create there is a threat from international law perspective, well, it is not acceptable. The other one is collective self-defense by Israelis. And here it is also very interesting because, again, according to the Charter of the United Nations, Article 51, the minimum is there should be a kind of request from the other one that you think has the right to defend itself, let alone this complicated discussion that actually it was the Americans, it was the Israelis that in June 2025 or in February 2028 initiated the aggression, so they cannot talk about the right to self-defense. But even if you want to talk about the right of self-defense for the Israelis, for whatever reason that you think this is correct, at least if you want to collectively join them to defend, there should be a kind of request by the Israelis, which is not mentioned in the statement of the State Department or to the letter that the Americans submitted to the United Nations Security Council on the basis of Article 51. So I think I can stop here. The message that I have at this point is the aggression is so clear, the serious violation of Jus-Cogen norms of prohibition of use of force, the aggression, and also prohibition of the threat of use of force is continuously established. Last point that I want to add here is now there is a naval blockade against Iran going on in the south, close to the Strait of Hormuz, and in accordance with the definition of aggression in international law, this is also another aggression which is taking place. So we have aggression of 28 February 2026, we have the continuation of the aggression by the naval blockade, and we have also the violation, or let's say the serious violation of Jus-Cogen's norms of international law by threatening on a daily basis of use of force against Iran and also in the other countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much for grounding us on that. I think it really helped help us understand where it has started so that we can talk about what happened the very first day, which was pretty significant. Both knowing that it happened in the context of just a few weeks earlier of February 28, the world witnessed the kidnapping of a sovereign president, a sitting president of a sovereign state by the United States, and following that, the very first day, what happened was the assassination of Ayatollah Khamenei, and followed a few hours later by the massacre in Minab at Shajareh Tayyibah school. I think how it has started is also a significant point that we need to pause and we need to think about it. And I would love to go to Dr. Sadat to share us your thoughts about this.
Appreciating, in the name of God, the God of wisdom, I would like also to join Puriya's wish for peace everywhere, including in our region. Before going to details, the legal aspects, I want to give a legal notice. We are going to have a legality approach, while the other side has a lethality approach. So this is very important, and I want to quote unquote the Secretary of War of the US. And this title has been opted intentionally, not to have a defense, but to have a war. And he said it in the middle of the war, in the middle of the aggression against Iran on 2nd March 2026, I'm quoting, "The US will not fight with the stupid rules of engagement." End of quoting. So even though we are going to dig into the legalities, we have to take into consideration that the other side less opted for such approach, and this is very important. I want to start with a general notice again by what I see in the international legal fora these days. Hopefully there have been a unified and consensus among almost all or many international legal institutions that the aggression on the first day was unlawful, and as it was fully elaborated and presented by Pouria, against the UN Charter. But I see I see an hesitation. Some people in the academia hesitate to call it aggression. So once I was Googling it, I saw that they opted for some titles which are not the correct legal term. So US strike, Iran, US/Israeli conflict, and many such titling which are not correct in legal sense. Everyone should not shy to loudly say that there is an aggression. And this is very important, because I want to go to my main point, that there have been a lot of discussions among politicians and the lawyers, what is the legal nature of non-aggression? Is it a peremptory norms of international law, or it's a normal one? We know it, what is the implication and consequences from hierarchical effects. Hopefully, International Law Commission in 2022, in its conclusions, specified on the top list the non-aggression as clear and manifest example of peremptory norms. So, building upon this nature, it is not easy for third parties to say we are neutral. Once you have a peremptory norms that is blatantly and manifestly violated by superpowers, top 5 military powers of the world, both of them nuclear states, this should be reacted and addressed properly. Because this is my message, as it was mentioned. Today is for Iran, but who knows who is the next. And based on that, it is important to touch upon that having a peremptory norms, or as it is said, Uskogan's rules, then a lot of obligation will lead for the third parties, which is important. Before concluding on this round, I want to add some more implicit objects for this aggression. So there are some surface formal justifications, preemptive self-defense, preventive self-defense. There are some justifications, the 3 justifications, but we should not forget that there are some implicit but declared objects in the middle of this conflict as well. And again, I want to quote President Trump statement, firstly, that he wants to obliterate, destroy the Iranian civilization. And secondly, his admission for providing arms to some separatist group. So I want to be clear, that was not a normal aggression at all. That was a serious, maybe more than serious, breach of a peremptory norms, which needs adequate and proper reaction by everyone. And I want to stop here, and then I'm ready for the next round to elaborate more on that.
For sure. Thank you very much. You mentioned third estates in your remarks, and I want to pick up on that. I think it's something that all of us, from diplomats to legal scholars, have been grappling with over the past 70 days. And we know, if we want to, I guess, distinguish the third estates, we can talk about the Persian Gulf estates that host military, U.S. military bases that are used to launch acts of aggression against Iranian territory, and then we have Europeans as well who are further away and differently involved, you could say, and we need to. I guess it would be helpful to hear for everyone. I think it would be very interesting to hear about Iranian perspectives on how we understand them from legal perspective and otherwise as well. Before I go to our esteemed guest here in the room, I would like to turn to our guest in Paris, Dr. Dupont. I would like to go to you to get your initial thoughts on the involvement of third estates and their responsibility, legally or otherwise, or if you have anything else to add on what was already said, we would love to hear it. The floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much for the invitation. Adding to what has just been mentioned on the characterization of the military action taken by the US and Israel against the Islamic Republic of Iran, once as rightly described as an act of aggression under international law, from this characterization, there are legal consequences that flow from characterization. Under international law, it is generally admitted that there exists an obligation on all states not to recognize as lawful a situation that has been created by a breach of a peremptory norm. And as has been just mentioned, this is the case of the crime of aggression. So that in that context, all states and also international organizations could have been expected to publicly condemn in the strongest terms the aggression that was perpetrated back in February, and to act accordingly in taking practical measures of non-recognition of these unlawful actions. What is very perplexing and frustrating for us in the West, especially, is that some Western states or groups of states have issued public statements that in practice do exactly the opposite. I think of statements that since the beginning of the aggression were in the tone of, they said maybe it was unfortunate that the attack took place. It would have been better if the situation could have been managed within the framework of the UN Security Collective System, within the Security Council. But in the same way, they maintained that Iran would bear part of the responsibility of that situation, and that, and in that sense, they tend to overestimate the reactions that Iran took in the face of the aggression. So this is, these kinds of positions, which are those of some states, because as Dr. Sadat correctly mentioned, in its vast majority, the international community of legal scholars took an adequate position, I would say. But this is from some Western diplomacies, this is a very dangerous precedent setting, especially in the face of some of the most blatant violations of international law. I think in particular of the threats that have been made to assassinate Iranian negotiators while they are conducting precisely negotiations. This is one of the most sensitive violations of the basically accepted principle of the sanctity of ambassadors and of diplomatic envoys. So this is unfortunately something that should be corrected in order for the international community to adopt a unified stance on these developments.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dupont. I'd like to turn to our room to Dr. Kazemi to give us a little bit more about third estates. I think it would be also helpful to focus on how some of Iran's neighboring countries, including Arab states in the Persian Gulf, initially claimed uninvolvement. We know that they denied any involvement in any of the assaults that took place, and over time that proved to be inaccurate. And nonetheless, Iran insisted on its purposeful use of military objectives, targeting exclusively military objectives that are used to target and conduct act of hostility against its territory. What do you think about that situation?
Thank you, Dr. Detaghi, for giving me the floor. I would like to join the others to have greetings to our audience all over the world. This is a very crucial and key question, and it's a very important question, especially seeing it in the context of the present developments in the region, and the effects that it may have, and to my understanding, would have in the future of the armed complex and the positions of the states, other states, vis-a-vis the act of aggression committed by one state against the others. So I'd like at the beginning to reemphasize what mentioned by Dr. Sadat, that something which is today for Iran may be for another countries or the other countries in future, not long future, maybe very recent, very near future. What we have seen in the threat of destruction of another peaceful state in our region by the President of the United States is an example that it shows that they will not stop at that door. They may go much further. And about the responsibility of the third states, especially countries in the Persian Gulf, the fact is we use the term third states because we see them as country outside the conflicts between Iran and the US. But it's not something very legally accurate, because they were providing bases, military bases, which are, there are credible reports proving that those bases were used by the enemy army, enemy forces, to attack Iran. So actually, from the perspective of Iran, or seeing it very legally, they are not actually third states in one way or another. But still, Iran confined its responses to those states or the bases to just attacking the bases, US bases in the region. But still, the states hosting US bases, legally, they are part of the act of aggression. Resolution 3314 of 1947 is very clear. If you just consult the resolution, you will see in paragraph 3, subparagraph F, it's clear providing bases is an act of aggression. So, legally speaking, they are complicit, and sometimes the first-hand perpetrators of acts of aggression. This is the fact, and this is a legal fact. But still, Iran differentiated between those states and the bases of US bases which were hosting. And Iran's main military actions against those bases, those countries were limited to those bases. That's the first thing. But if I am allowed, I would like to follow up what mentioned by Professor Askari and how he effectively established that the argument of self-defense is not a valid argument as far as Americans' act of aggression against Iran is concerned. I want to go to the very first day, as you mentioned. Mm-hmm. It started by targeting Iran's supreme leader. And to my understanding, they don't have any right of self-defense. That was a quintessential act of aggression. Because, as Professor Sadat mentioned, the objective of the act is important. And they mentioned that they want regime change, instability in the country, or when arming a separatist group, actually they were threatening the integrity and integral territory of Iran. So it means their real target, by assassinating the supreme leader, was attacking police of Iran in the form of regime change, and also by providing arms, giving opportunities, attacking border posts to let some foreign fighters to enter into the country, actually helping to undermine the territorial integrity of Iran. So to my understanding, that was an act of aggression, and it was a part of a bigger plan. So just I wanted to follow what already mentioned by Dr. Askari on the very essence of the act, the military or the war of Israel and the US against Iran, and how just attacking the supreme leader makes a profound, quintessential act of aggression. Thank you.
No, thank you. I really appreciate you emphasizing on the IHL and different aspects of it. And I'll come back to you about that, because I would love for us to discuss further other forms of IHL violations that took place over these days. But before I do, I want to go back to our third state responsibility question, and I want to go to Dr. Baharvan here. If there are any further points that you think is important for us to note before we move on to the second round of the discussion. I know with your extensive experience as a diplomat and being a former ambassador in the UK, what do you think about how the European countries specifically are situated in this conflict, and what is their role in the legality of this analysis in general?
Okay. Thank you very much for giving me the floor. Maybe some of your audience are not professional in international law. First of all, allow me to go a little bit to the foundation of the question, why the legal approach is an important one. That's very important. And what the legal thinking says here, because sometimes I see among the scholars and among the diplomats saying that the international law has been weakened, or maybe there is no rules nowadays in the international relations, and somehow they are trying to submit to what is being done by the United States and the current administration in the United States. That's not the right way to go. I think that emphasize on the legal aspects of this act of aggression is very important for international community and even for the individuals living in various countries in the world. Because the legal rules, international law is not an abstract set of rulings about the conduct of the states, is in fact the result of two very serious experience of the people around the world, which was the World War I and Second World War, in which millions of people were killed by the conflicting parties to the war. And there was a massive destruction, and at the end of it, using the nuclear bomb by the United States against Japan in the Second World War II. Therefore, the human being, I mean the human community, they have an experience which was very serious, which was very destructive to the morality and to the life of human being all around the world. Therefore, they decided to have a set of rules for the conduct of a state when they are living side by side. And we should not easily set aside these kind of rules which tries to normalize a little bit and civilize a little bit the behavior of states against one another. Therefore, when we say that the attack of United States and Israel against Iran is against the Charter of United Nations, Article 4.2, or other rules of international law, it means is against, in fact, against the humanity and the morality of international community and the communities living all around the world. That is one thing that we should emphasize on, and nobody can be impartial in this kind of acts when we are seeing them. We have to raise our voice against them, and we have to stand against them to tell them that this is not the way that the states shall conduct each other in their relations with the other countries in the world. Therefore, when we say it is illegal to attack other country like the attack of United States and Israel against Iran, it means that we have a duty as the states and as individuals to raise our voice against this kind of behavior of the United States. It's not only a document of international law that we are talking about. We are talking about the whole humanity. As to the European states, sometimes I ask myself why the European states are facing a decline in international relations in such a situation that now the European states are living in. To answer this question, I think that the decline of European as an international actor, if we see the European states as a whole, the decline of these countries started in their role in international relations, I think at the time that they relinquish their values and their beliefs in the international relations. At the time that they closed their eyes to the acts of United States, first of all, the unilateral and coercive measures, which is sanctions against the others, when they closed their eyes against the violation of the other countries, especially the United States, of violation of human rights, when they closed their eyes against the rule of law in international community, and when they closed their eyes against what happened in Gaza, and many civilians were killed in Gaza, and European countries, they just omitted to act, and even most of them, they didn't condemn this kind of behavior or this kind of acts against the civilians and innocent people being killed in Gaza. Therefore, European countries, they've had a brand, they have had an advantage, which was attaching to the rule of law, which they were just defending the human rights in the past and rule of law inside their countries and inside the international community. But at the time they started closing their eyes against this kind of acts by the others, by the United States and Israel, I think the role of European countries started to diminish in the international community. And I see that as the main reason for the European countries that now they cannot act as an independent actor in international community.
Thank you very much for making those crucial points. And I think it's also worthy to note, since we're having a legal discussion, about how the Convention of Genocide obligate a state to take positive action. So their omission is actually indeed illegal under international law, in a sense that they had the obligation to prevent and punish genocide, and they failed to do so. I would like to turn to Vienna. We have the pleasure of having Dr. Bagherpour with us, who's, as I mentioned, Director General of International Legal Affairs of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And I'm gonna, touch a little bit on the elephant of the room, and I would love to ask you about the Hormuz situation, because we know the coastal states' obligations to facilitate passage is conditional upon the existence of circumstances in which safety and security of the coastal states is not being disturbed. And in this case, that is not the case. And we also know that the significance of Hormuz in our region, in a sense that the flow of capital, about 20% of global oil and LNG transit, it goes through this strait. And the control over these oil flows has constituted a pillar factor for the United States in its domination and hegemony in the region. And now, by asserting sovereignty over this and regulating it, Iran is disturbing that. We would love to hear your thoughts and Iran's perspective on this issue.
Thank you for inviting me. Greetings to all audiences. Indeed, to one of the specific and delicate aspects as a result of the aggression was the situation in terms of the passage through the Strait of Hormuz. From that perspective, I would like to present my remarks under the two chapters, namely the hierarchical order in international law, and also the fundamental change of circumstances. On the first one, I'm confident that the legal practitioners are very familiar with the different sets of law, and there exists some hierarchical order between these different types of international law. As a result of which, each level possesses rank and more fundamental character, and thus rules at lower level cannot be interpreted or applied in conflict with the principles of higher levels. The first levels, I assume, relate to the fundamental principles of international law, including norms of or the slogans of prohibition of aggression, which is very fundamental international law, enshrined in Article 2.4 of the Charter and right to self-defense. It seems that these principles stand at the axis of the hierarchy of international codes and norms and establish the framework of limitation for all other rules. The second level here for our discussion refers to the law of armed conflict, which governs conduct in armed conflict and hostilities and determines which conduct is permissible in time of war. When, with regard to the armed conflict laws and how we can use it in sea and in territorial waters, or for example, we can refer to San Remo manuals and many other things that is produced in the textbook of international law of armed conflict, namely the Convention on the 1949 Geneva Convention. And the third level, which relates to the Strait of Hormuz, Persian Gulf, and Sea of Oman, relates to the law of the sea as a specialized, specific body of law. The rules governing the regime of passage through international straits, the right of, and everything that is being elaborated in 1982 convention cannot be applied in a vacuum or by disregarding the higher levels. And that is a very important. In other words, the law of the sea must not be analyzed separately from the root causes that have shaped the current situation in the whole region, including the Strait of Hormuz. As a result of which, I think I can continue the discussion specifically in relation to the law of the sea and touch on some basic points. It is being said that the international strait regime for crossing and passaging through them is based on the transit passage. I think we should be careful when we refer or talk about this regime regarding the Strait of Hormuz as parts of the territorial waters of Iran and Oman. So there is no so-called international waters. The whole Strait of Hormuz is a part of territorial waters of Iran and Oman. Having said that, and referring to Iran's commitment, international commitment in terms of the transit passage, it should be noted that Iran is not a party to the 1982 Convention on the Law of the Sea, and also is not a party to the 1958 Convention. And so Iran is not bound by the provisions of the 1982, except for insofar as they have become part of customary rule. And I assume that the regime of transit passage does not met the criteria, established criteria of customary international law. And here I would like to refer to the work of International Commissions 2018. It's explicitly elaborating how customary rule can be formed, and it has to. One of them is that the state concerned has accepted the binding nature of that, and Iran's persistent practice, Iran's laws and regulations, throughout the last decades, in terms of its laws, in terms of its positions, and its practice, it's proven that not accepted the passage as a binding customary rule upon Iran, at least. And even when we have signed the 1982, we have said that we are not bound by this part of the provisions, and we call it as a package deal between contractual concessions between two sectors of the countries there. So I think for Iran, the transit passage is not binding. Then, as a result, we should refer back to the customary innocent passage, which is being applied in the Strait of Hormuz. From that perspective, I understand what has been happening since 28th of February. We can refer to the second points that I call it the fundamental change of circumstances, which is a concept in international law. Exclusively, we refer it as the legal as enshrined in Article 62 of the 1960 Law of Treaty Convention, But here we are not referring to that. We are referring to a general theory of fundamental circumstances. And it's very important to highlight that for several decades, Iran has not exercised its rights, but it doesn't mean that it has relinquished its rights. Change of circumstances, fundamental change of circumstances, has made Iran to adopt and to take some practical measures, not only during the armed conflict, but also to foresee for some new arrangements for the future. And the new arrangement for the future will be taken in a joint work between Iran and Oman, as I said, the two coastal states, by their joint work. That consultation will be within the framework of international law of the sea. And there are many rooms for maneuver to take and adopt some practical measures in terms of passage, at the interest of this safety of the passage between the Strait of Hormuz, and also at the interest of the coastal states to save their national security and territorial integrity. And I think from that point, we can have some sort of fees for services. I'm not talking about tolls for the mere passage, but I'm talking about the fees for services that are being provided, but substantial. And I think as a result of that fundamental change of circumstances, it should be framed in a more legal framework within the context of international law of the sea and also the general international law. I thank you.
Thank you very much. We really appreciate you taking the time out of your busiest schedule in Vienna to join us today. I'll come back to the room, and in this second round, I would love to, have a more open floor so that we can have more of a back and forth discussion and respond to each other. So feel free to let me know if you would like to jump in on any point or intervene. And I'm going to go to Dr. Baharvan here if you want to add anything to what's been said or start us off for the second round.
Thank you again. As you said, I'm a retired diplomat. Now I am a private person, therefore what I say about the Strait of Hormuz are my legal opinion as a lawyer who practice law. We have two sets of rules that applies to the Strait of Hormuz. One is freedom of navigation, and one is the rules regarding the sovereignty and jurisdiction of the coastal states. These two rules, they are living together. None of them can undermine the other one. If there is a freedom of navigation, there is a right to the coastal states to have some arrangements for the ships and vessels going out and in or through the straits. The coastal states have the right to apply rules in regard with their security, with the safety of navigation, with environment, and also with the acts which might be considered by the law illegal or criminal, like smuggling, or even terrorism, or even if there is an act of aggression or acts that can undermine the security of the coastal states. Really, I cannot understand the opinion of some countries who oppose the opinions of Iran about the Strait of Hormuz, because the main country, the main coastal states of the Strait of Hormuz is Iran. Therefore, Iran has the right in regard with its sovereignty and jurisdiction. That's very clear in the Convention of the Law of the Sea of 1982, that the states can put in place arrangements in regard with their sovereignty and security. I mean, that's one thing that we have to bear in mind. Secondly, some rules of international law, they have divided the status of states in the time of peace and in the time of war. For example, the Monroe Convention on the Straits of Bosphorus and Dardanelles, that they have extra authority to the state of Turkey. When there is a war, they can have a separate rules for passing ships through these two straits. Therefore, the states have the right, in accordance with the international law and generally accepted rules of international law, to have some arrangements for the passage of the ships through the straits. Whether having arrangements, rules, or laws means undermining the freedom of navigation, that's not the case at all. If we have, for example, some rules for the cars to go through the streets in the cities, that doesn't mean that you are preventing ships through passing through the straits, but you are just putting some regulations on that. As you see, the person of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs repeatedly is saying that is reflecting the official opinion of the government of Iran, saying that by no means Iran is going to undermine the freedom of navigation through the Strait of Hormuz. But that doesn't mean that Iran will not have some rules in regard with the security in accordance with the jurisdiction and the sovereignty of the state of Iran. Therefore, having rules, having arrangements for the ships passing through the strait, it doesn't mean you are preventing from the freedom of navigation. Therefore, these rules are living together. When the international law is talking about the freedom of navigation, in the same time exactly, even in the Convention of the Law of the Sea, is talking about the sovereign right, sovereignty, and jurisdiction of the coastal states as well. Therefore, I think my opinion is that at the same time that Iran is trying to ensure the freedom of navigation, in the same time also is trying to set some rules for the passing ships through the Strait of Hormuz. And by no circumstances, these two sets of rules are not conflicting each other, but they are living together, in fact. Thank you.
That's some really crucial point you made there. I think it's very important, and I think, you know, at the heart of what you said, how I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that our understanding that international law has never been external to power, right? It is, power has, from the very beginning of the conception of international law, has been at the core of legal doctrines. We don't have, you know, concepts such as the war on terror, for example. The United States was able to create this concept of borderless, timeless war, conflict, because it was able to project force to apply it, right? And I think it's important for us to recognize that the reason that Iran is being able to assert sovereignty and regulate a Strait of Hormuz is not only because it is legally able to do so, but that it has taken the decision that its force allows itself to apply its interpretation of the law, which has always been the real battle behind international law. Who is able to project its interpretation through power over the interpretation of international law? I'd like to go to Dr. Sadat. Please add any thoughts that you have.
I'm appreciating, and I want to build upon what Dr. Baharvan just said and make some connection with my previous intervention. Mm-hmm. For lawyers, we have a concept very important, applicable law. It was repeatedly mentioned. But applicable law does not mean selective application of the desired law. So applicable law means going to all relevant laws that are suitable for a specific case. There are very important specifications for the Strait of Hormuz, which I want to emphasize on them. It is occasionally said that this strait is an international strait, which I believe is wrong. The strait is situated in the territorial waters of Iran and Oman. There is no international maritime zone belonging to the high seas. So all passages, whether to have a transit passages on the other side, since Oman is part of the UNCLOS, even though Oman also had a declaratory declaration upon joining the UNCLOS and touching upon what's mentioned about security and peace causes that should be taken into consideration, or from the Iranian side, which Iran is not part of the UNCLOS, or even as it was mentioned by Dr. Bagherpour as persistent objector to such a rule. So the question is that under the law of the sea, all states have jurisdiction and sovereignty in their territorial waters. Why they should not have the same if this territorial water is based in the straits? So why this distinction? I think this distinction is nonsense and does not help it. There were good examples, and I want to raise these examples with the audiences. Okay, if Iran and Oman overside with the strait, and noticing that some ships are engaging with the human trafficking or supporting terrorist activities. So what is the responsibility of the coastal states? To let them have the transit passage and to be ignorant? So this is very important. All rights are built upon some responsibilities. And this is new one. Before this aggression, so even then there were some speculation that these straits are used for supporting some military bases in the south of Persian Gulf region, but Iran, as at that time's conclusion was not to exercise its rights. But now the case is totally different. There are 19 military bases in the Middle East, many of them in the south of the Persian Gulf region. There are 45,000 American soldiers, many of them based in this region. And this support for the aggression, as I mentioned in my first intervention, is a use against peremptory norms. So Iran from now on cannot be ignorant about this history. So from now on, this strait, if it's going to be a strait of peace, it should be a strait of peace for everyone. So this is very important that I wanted to touch upon that. Since I dealt with the issue of the military bases of the US in the south of the Persian Gulf region, I want to touch upon this general principle of law. States have the obligation about any activities that arising from their territory or the territories that are under their jurisdiction. So there is a burden on their shoulder to prove that these military bases were not used. This is very odd to believe that none of these military bases were used for attacking Iran. 900 targets were attacked in the first 12 hours of the war or aggression. So this cannot happen with fully fledged preparation in advance, and it is almost unreasonable to believe that none of these military bases were engaged on that. So this is a burden on the shoulder of those states who are hosting these basis to prove that they were not involved. And I wanted to touch upon that. And my final words is about equating aggressor and with the defender. I see this anomaly again in academia. It's not fair and it's unjust to equate between US, Israeli from one side, who are the aggressor, and Iran from the other side. The defender should be supported in his defense, as it is claimed everywhere. Law is everywhere is the same. I want to borrow from the message of Dr. Baharwand and give this message as my final message to the European counterparts. It will come soon to your periphery the same aggression. Maybe today you do not believe on that, but if you go to your inner voice, you will hear it loudly.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sadat, for that. I guess I also want to build upon what you said to move forward the conversation, and that is 2 points, I guess. Number one is whether the law really is the same in the current international legal order, or it applies the same to all states, and if all states are equally sovereign. With that, I think it's important to go back to our self-defense, and we talked about in the initial round what were the objectives of the United States in the attack, and we had a brief legal analysis by Dr. Askari. I think it's worthwhile to also, maybe by Dr. Askari and Dr. Kazemi, to talk about Iran's strategy. You know, we talked about how the United States was in fact inconsistent in its legality and its politics. They talked about regime change. Trump said he's not sure if the map of Iran would remain the same by the end of this war. Another day they said, oh, they don't mean regime change, they just want to talk about nuclear. So we saw a systemic inconsistency in their logic, both politically and otherwise. Whereas on Iran's side, it's always been consistent argument of self-defense. And I think that's worth unpacking here. Why don't we start with you, Dr. Askari?
Yes, sure. Thank you very much. I am really enjoying the discussions by the panelists, and I think we really need more time to go into the details. But I want to start with the final point, which was raised by Professor Sadat Meidani. You know, international law, of course, has a kind of degree of crimes. And when it comes to the crime of aggression or act of aggression, we can say that we are talking about one of the most serious violations of the rules of the international legal order. So when we say that there is an aggression going on or an aggression took place, it means that in the most serious way, the norms of international community, which the states has decided upon them, are violated. So this is something that we just need to repeat it, just to remind ourselves that we are not talking about something which happens on a daily basis. It is something very important. And of course, when international law is categorizing the act of aggression as one of the most important violations in the domain of international legal order, there is a legitimate question. So what is the answer by the international community or by international law to these kind of violations? And it is very interesting talking about the equality of the belligerents. Professor Sadat Meidani. We have general comment number 36 adopted by the Human Rights Committee, the treaty body of the Covenant of International Political and Civil Rights. And it is very clearly saying that the right to life of the combatants of the party which is defending against an aggression should be respected by international law and by international community. Recently, I was in a kind of panel discussion in the American Society of International Law, talking about the implementation of this general comment. And it is very interesting that for many lawyers in the international arena, what is mentioned in the general comment does make sense. And it is not because the IHL is not the applicable law. It is because there should be in the mindset of the lawyers in the international community, a kind of difference when it comes to the rights of the aggressing party and those who are defending their soil against an aggression. So this is something that I wanted to refer to based on what Professor Sadat mentioned. And now, maybe 2 minutes, I will need to talk about the Strait of Hormuz based on what was mentioned by Dr. Bagherpour. I mean, it is very interesting to remind ourselves of Article 51 once again. I mean, there is an aggression, so you as the country or the state under the threat, under the attack, have the right to attack, to defend yourself. And at the same time, on the basis of Article 51 of the United Nations Charter, you have to notify the Security Council of the United Nations that I am defending myself and I have the inherent right to continue this defense unless there is an action by the Security Council. So when you are notifying the Security Council, it is not just to do your homework. It is a kind of request for the organ which is in charge of the maintenance of international peace and security to do something, to stop the violation, to stop the aggression, to stop the armed attack against me. And the answer is silence. Not just by the Security Council, but by the international community in a general way. So you understand that, well, there is the superpower, a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council involved in this armed conflict, involved in this aggression. So as a matter of fact, the Security Council is unable to do something. Fair enough. So you start to think about the proportionality element of self-defense, and of course, very easily, you understand that from jus ad bellum point of view, you have the right to use the means that you have in your hands to defend yourselves on the basis of proportionality of jus ad bellum. And this is how Iran can also justify the way that is trying, or at the time of war, was trying to manage the transit in the Strait of Hormuz. But the reaction from the Security Council here is surprising. All of a sudden, there is a resolution telling you, well, I am unable to react to what happened, the root cause, the aggression, so I am also unable to touch it at all. And all of a sudden, I decided to say, well, what you are doing is against international law and you have to stop it. So now the question will come. From one point of view, there is a statement by the Security Council, and from the other side, you have the inherent right of the state, which is defending itself, using the proportionality element of self-defense under the, let's say, Caroline standards. So I think that this is some good ideas for thinking, and here I'm talking to our audience in other countries. When is the time to discuss the legality of the content of the Security Council resolutions? When is, from an international law perspective, we have the option to talk about an ultra-virus resolution adopted by the Security Council? I mean, there is a country defending itself by the book in accordance with the Charter of the United Nations, and of course one of the weapons in the hands of the defending party is to play with the geography. And all of a sudden, the Security Council, which cannot maintain international peace and security, appears in a flashing, in a kind of flashy light, and says, well, you do not have the right to use this weapon, or a strategy, or geography, which is part of your territorial waters. So I think it is a good question that we can raise. And I just wanted also to refer to San Remo manual, which was mentioned by Dr. Bagherpour, which is also very interesting. In times of war, the San Remo manual is extremely clear, saying that even the merchant vessels, let alone the others, even the merchant vessels, they have to follow the orders of the warring parties, and otherwise they have the right to shoot them. So they will become legitimate military targets in accordance with the San Remo manual, which is a kind of codification of international customary law. So thank you.
Thank you. We have 10 minutes, and I want to use it wisely. So what I'm going to do is I'll follow up on what you said, because I think it's a very good way to end the conversation, and then I'll have each of you about 1 minute of like closing remarks, if that's okay. And let me go back to you with your extensive experience, in Netherlands with international legal institutions, and building up on what was just said by Dr. Askari. How would you evaluate the current international legal institutions? We know that the Security Council is in deadlock, essentially. Again, just like the Cold War, right? We're seeing veto being used. We're seeing a systematic failure of the Council to conduct its duty to protect peace and security, international peace and security. And ICJ, historically, we know that Nicaragua won a case against the United States. Nicaragua was able to convict the United States for violation of its sovereignty and 2-4. And we also know that the South African case on genocide, we know there is no enforcing mechanism, even if we are able to take this to court, to appeal to international legal institutions. We know there is no enforcing mechanism behind it because it goes back to the Security Council. What do you think, and where do you think we are in terms of all of this, or any other thoughts that you want to share about what was said?
Thank you very much. It's $1 billion question.
I know.
It's not easy to answer, and you are starting with me the most difficult question to ask. If I go back to what you mentioned about inconsistency of the U.S. positions and the consistency of Iran in self-defense, I believe the U.S. were consistent in violating international law. And their position were inconsistent, but what they did, their deed were consistent. And they were very blunt and open to that. The point mentioned by Professor Sadat about legality and lethality, so that's the answer. So as someone who was practicing international law for years, it's difficult to say, but international law is at a crossroad at the moment. And because those who were considered themselves or proclaimed that they were guardians of international law, guardians of UN Charter, now they are openly talking about violating principles of international law, principles of UN Charter, and they boast on that. That's the most difficult things and the most painful things. So the only thing, it goes back to maybe some ethical issues, the positions that the international community, the real international community, because they are taking hostage or stealing the concept of international community as well. So some specific countries, they'd introduce themselves as international community, but international community is wide, larger, over 200 countries are composing that international community. So this is the position that the international community should take. They have to reconsider the enforcement. We understand, we know the deficiencies, we know the limitations, but maybe some steps should be taken. And if any steps want to be taken, it's the time. Otherwise, we lose the moment. And some countries which were in a position and they were dominating the whole world, now the world is questioning their dominance, their power. Power is in the essence of international politics. We understand that, but law has come to limit power. Otherwise, we go back to medieval centuries. Thank you.
There was some key points there. Thank you very much. Why don't we go to Dr. Sadat, 1 minute?
1 minute, 2 points.
Sure.
The first point is that, and I forgot it. I'm joking. The first point is that the good news is that international law, under international, there are some avenues if the Security Council is failing, and this is a new procedure in the US system. In 2024 or 2025, the General Assembly resolution adopted, the UNG adopted a resolution under which if the Security Council fail, there should be a reporting mechanism to the General Assembly under a limited time. And that should be also triggered. So there have been a draft resolution by Russian Federation, which was not adopted on the same day of 28/17. So now the General Assembly should deal with that. And it's not only an issue for Iran, it's an issue for the international community. The second point is that, and I want to share a masterpiece, a golden clause from the ICJ case law in the Nicaragua case. Okay, maybe everyone is disappointing about international law, but the court says that if a state acts in a way prima facie incompatible with a recognized rule, but defends its conduct by appealing to exceptions or justifications contained within the rules itself, then whether or not the state's conduct is in fact justifiable on that basis, the significance of that attitude is to confirm rather to weaken the rule. So I want to refer to all what's said. The US still referring to non-aggression, to non-use of force, and the exception that is existing. So the rule is there, and these statements should confirm it. And since non-aggression and non-use of force are peremptory norms, they could not be destroyed until unless, or they cannot be replaced until unless there is a new peremptory norms under the Vienna Convention on the Law of the Treaties.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sadat. Dr. Askari, final words.
Yes, thank you very much. Well, okay, we talked about the difficulties maybe the Security Council or the other international organizations, they have to react. But at the same time, we have to say that this time, the international community of the people, the academicians, the independent organizations, they were outspoken. I mean, just as an example, there were 100 academics teaching international law inside the United States, including many prominent figures, that they issued a statement saying that what the Americans are doing is against international law, is an act of aggression. And there were many podcasts, many seminars in different parts of the world repeating this. So we have to really appreciate that. And we have to emphasize on that we really need it. Because there is something that is repeatedly mentioned by the high-ranking officials in the White House, saying that we are trying to reach peace through power. And this means that with or without international law, the power will bring peace, which is a kind of very, very, very dangerous doctrine. And the only, let's say, normative system which can resist in front of such a dangerous doctrine or policy, in my opinion, is international law. So what the lawyers around the world did in condemnation of what happened in Iran is very much appreciated. And we really have to call for the continuation of these kind of efforts by all who really care about international peace. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll go to Dr. Dupont. Final thoughts. Can you hear us, Dr. Dupont?
Yes, yes, thank you. Yes, thank you. Just to quote the address made by the Prime Minister of Canada, Mr. Carney, back in January this year. You may remember that when he was in the Davos Forum, he said that the story of the international rules-based order was partially false, and that the strongest would exempt themselves from when convenient, and that trade rules are enforced asymmetrically. And he went on saying that international law applies with varying rigor depending on the identity of the accused or the victim. This candid admission will lead to a new level of perception within the international community that international law remains to be upheld in a fair and unconditional manner. Thank you.
Thank you very much for ending us on that note. And final remarks goes to Dr. Baharvand.
Thank you. How many minutes?
You can take as long as you want, but don't go more than 2, please.
Okay, I promise to be brief. Maybe I can sum up. We were talking about the qualification of the acts of United States and the regime of Israel against Iran. No doubt that they were illegal acts and they are violations and blunt violation of international law. Those acts are were acts of aggression, and continuously are acts of aggression. No justification can rip the qualification of illegality from these kind of acts against the territory of Iran and sovereignty of Iran. That is a mixed and complex collection of violations of international law, international humanitarian law, and international human rights law. That's one thing. Secondly, I'm not that much disappointed. We continue to defend international law. The world cannot be lawless. We always need rules, and we have to defend rules. The act of bullying cannot make laws or new laws for the world or for the other countries. The world is not lawless, and we also try to build upon the rules of international law to defend our country. This will have consequences in regard with the state responsibility, first of all, the criminal responsibility and economic responsibility and damages that have been inflicted upon our country and institutions of our countries, being civil or military, but most of the damages which are significant are made upon the civil infrastructure of our country, and we will continue tirelessly to compensate that damages inflicting upon our countries. Secondly, maybe I can, from Tehran, give a message to the people of the world that we should not submit to bullies and surrender to bullying behavior of the administration of other countries, being United States or any other country, to justify any acts which is not based on the rules and laws, being international or internal law. I believe that the current administration of United States not only has violated international law, but also has violated the laws of United States in regard with the rules of engagement and also humanitarian international law as well. Therefore, anybody, any country, they have to stand against the violation of law, because if we are not doing that, the whole international community is at stake. And we have to defend the international community. Not only the international community is composed of sovereignties and countries, it's composed of individuals, lawyers, writers, and every individual living on the planet. Therefore, that is not only a state responsibility to defend international law, but is the duty of any person and individual living on the planet to defend international law and raise the voice against the violation of international law, human rights, and international humanitarian law. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for ending us on that note, and I couldn't agree more with your statement on how we can't live in a lawless world. And I think Global South actors, the insistence, especially Iran in this case as well, the insistence of Iran to act legally, even though we're seeing everything, break loose, is important and says a lot about the commitment of the Global South nations to building an alternative legal system and committing to the principles that we've talked about. And I think that requires a whole other panel to talk about, maybe critically about international, or reflect upon how we want to move forward as international community. Although that also questions if it's a one unit, but that leaves us for another talk. Thank you all very much for being with us. I learned from you, and I really enjoyed, and I hope that these conversations continue, especially bringing forth Iranian perspectives in this very historical moment is really important and significant. I want to thank IPIS and all the organizers, and I would like to invite everyone to follow the social media and follow the work of TDF, and we look forward to seeing you all in our next conversations. Thank you very much.